And Amanda Kirby is the CEO of Do It Profiler, and until recently she held a chair in developmental disorders at the University of South Wales and is a qualified GP and worked for some years in adult psychiatry. Amanda is also the founder of the Discovery Centre, a specialist centre for children with adults and developmental disorders. She also has a close personal interest in neurodiversity and has many close family members and wonderful talented people. She has won a number of awards, including Doctor of the Year, and has also been a judge in the 2020 Top 50 Inclusive Employers in the UK. Amanda has been published in many books in the field of diversity, and they've been translated into many languages, and has many peer-reviewed papers in the field and continues to undertake research. But Amanda's doing a topic today that has come up, and it's a really, really key topic for ourselves as an organisation, and the questions that we get. And delighted Amanda to come along today to do this, and welcome to her. Amanda Kirby's going to have a chat to us today on ADHD and women, or girls.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just trying to do multitasking, which I'm obviously not good at doing, I think, at the moment. So I'm just going to see whether I can share can you see my screen?
Yes.
It's just going to be changing, and you can let me know if you can see my slides. It's just going to click over. Just waiting for that to happen magically. Can you see my slides?
Good to go.
Good to go. Brilliant. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me this afternoon. I'm really interested in what Ned said and the positive take that he was talking about, which is so important. In the next half an hour, I'm going to talk about girls and ADHD, and this is great because 20 years ago we wouldn't have been talking about girls and ADHD. We would have been focusing so much about boys. Thank you for my introduction. I'm a bit of an oddball, so that's who I am, really, in a way. And I come with sort of a number of different hats from different directions. But one of the things that I think is important when we're talking this afternoon is that I have a really neurodivergent family. And I've got family members who have children, grandchildren, as well as other family members who have a range of neurodivergent traits, and ADHD being one of them. And when Ned was ticking off all the different symptoms and signs, I was thinking, I know, I veer very much towards my ADHD diagnosis. So what I want to do is talk to you a little bit about what we know about ADHD in girls this afternoon, and then to take some questions. So put anything you like in chat and we can pick those up towards the end. The first is really, I suppose, is thinking about, we used to think this ADHD was predominantly, like we know, think about other neurodevelopmental conditions, was much more of a boys thing. And it was tended to be because we were looking at boys things. And years ago, we'd see that the prevalence rates was much higher in boys than girls. And what we realize now, that one of the reasons why we have missed or misidentified girls is probably we're looking much more through a male lens and looking at the way that boys behave in class and in life compared to girls. And so we know that it's really quite different. So I'm going to give you some references and some studies that have been done as we go along as well. And you know, when adults with ADHD are studied, there's similar numbers of women as men. So it actually may be that we've been missing a lot of women. And talking to lots of people, adults, females in the last few years, is a number of women have been saying, I've just got diagnosed. I wasn't diagnosed till I was 20 or 30 or even 40 or 50. And also when they were diagnosed, it was a case often that they were diagnosed because they had something else. So perhaps they had dyslexia and then somebody said, oh, I think you could have ADHD. Or alternatively, lots of people say, well, it was only when my child was diagnosed that the psychiatrist then said, well, who's he or she most like? And you go, like me, that the penny's dropped and then that person's got diagnosed as well. So this is relatively new in many ways of people catching up, women catching up. So it really does suggest that girls with ADHD are being missed and they haven't been having their condition identified properly. So what we know that boys are 3 to 7 times more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD in girls. So there's going to be a number of reasons for that. Is this we're not looking in the right place, or is it the people who are looking are not seeing the right things, or they're not being trained appropriately, or are we so I'm going to unpack that a little bit more. So the first thing is, where are all those girls? So the girls may be missed because what was the training that was done predominantly was around looking for boys who were going to be jumping up and around and hyperactive and impulsive in the classroom and calling out. This was the sort of case scenario of what a child with ADHD was like. And this was really very much was what people were looking for predominantly. And actually, boys get identified if they are disruptive in the classroom. If they're stopping other people, other children get on with their work, they're interrupting other children, they can't focus on their work, then it's annoying somebody else, and sometimes that's the trigger. It's not a good one, but that's the reality. Or girls can be diagnosed as something else, which I'll come on to. So Ned talked about the different subtypes, and these are categorizations. This is not about people, but this is a sort of categorization that's sometimes used. And that the inattentive type, and till relatively recently, as Ned really emphasized, we were really thinking about ADHD as disorder. And I think we've come a long way now thinking about strengths that come with having ADHD. And yeah, it'd be lovely if we could change the name. And I think things will happen in the next few years. I'm going to show you a little bit about neurodiversity in a moment. So inattentive ADHD, making careless mistakes, difficulty remaining focused, these are things that are the impact of having some of the challenges, not the positive benefits. Losing things, starting with things distracted, cheatiness, the restlessness, the on the go, talking excessively, which some girls will have, but it'll be the dreamy type, the inattentive type. Because you're not seeing that overt hyperactivity, sometimes those girls are not being picked up because they're not being disruptive to others in the classroom. So are there gender-specific ADHD symptoms? Not necessarily, but it just may be that girls and boys have different sorts of behaviors. You see that in play from a very early age, there are differences. But it could be that girls lose focus and then whisper or talk to their peers. It could be that they sort of passing notes or doodling in class, or not focusing on the class, or they could be changing their friends quite readily. So having a friend and then not maintaining friendships. So what you could be seeing are different things that might not be identified completely as ADHD, or others aren't really thinking about that. Okay, so I think that's really important. So the diagnostic manuals, perhaps for diagnosis, really need to think about giving examples of how we could notice girls more, so that when we're thinking about it, we can think about coming to the fore and getting those stories which make us start to think about, yes, this is a girl with ADHD. That would be very helpful. So that requires training for GPs and psychiatrists and adult psychiatrists to really understand what girls with ADHD look like. So where do some of the girls go? Well, they go because, a bit like Ned was talking about the impact of having ADHD, if you're not having the talent and the energy harness focused on, then some girls do have lower educational achievement. They might have impulsive behavior, which ends up with perhaps unplanned pregnancies, mental health conditions, which I'll talk about in a moment, and self-harming. So sometimes girls are seen in child and adolescent and adult psychiatry services for other things. And it's only if that adult psychiatrist is thinking about ADHD that they might actually be asking the right questions to say, well, actually, you might have ADHD and it's been missed as you were growing up. And that often happens in adulthood. And it's only in the last few years that adult psychiatrists are starting to be trained much more in ADHD and not only on anxiety and depression and bipolar disorder and other things like OCD. So what we know from the research is girls tend to get a diagnosis if they have higher levels of ADHD symptoms. Almost they have to be worse in terms of the impact of their challenges than the boys for them to gain a diagnosis. So it's often late, and it's often if it's really very obvious, otherwise they get missed. Boys get, as I said, get identified because they're falling out of education. So they're seen as this is behavior, and often boys with ADHD end up perhaps getting excluded from school, going to alternative provision. The girls are recognized maybe internalizing some of their symptoms, and you start to see getting anxious or having mood or eating disorders. They're seen elsewhere. They're seen through a different professional lens. So the other thing about this really is that teachers are less likely to identify girls. So this is important. So where do girls get missed is because in class is going to be one of the key places that you're going to be identified. And if the teachers around you don't recognize or know that this could be ADHD, they're not going to be thinking about it and not speaking to the parents. And if the parents aren't thinking about it, that girl can get missed. So in one study, they showed of primary school teachers that they found they frequently didn't identify. They were looking for hyperactivity. That was their sort of classic thing. They were given case studies. Who do you think has got ADHD? And they missed out those girls who had those sort of features. They weren't aware also that medication could be helpful in this context. So that's the problem. We need to go back to initial teacher training and make sure the teachers are trained so that they identify, they can talk to the parents, and the children can get referred in childhood. So that's really going to be very important. So what are some of the challenges? And I want to talk about strengths, and I'm going to give you practical strategies as well. But actually the reason why often people get a diagnosis isn't because of the things that are going swimmingly well. It's sometimes because they're not going so well, and the impact on that child's self-esteem and confidence. So it might be, as Ned said, staying focused on things of less interest, heightened interest when it's buzzy and it's new, but when it's having something you have to do, which is routine, really difficult. Starting your homework, but not finishing it off. Starting a project with enthusiasm, but not completing it. Difficulty paying attention to the details. So I was talking to somebody who's an entrepreneur who's got ADHD, and she was saying that she's terrible about putting invoicing in and billing. She does loads of brilliant work, but she's not doing that bit. She needs somebody next to her who can do those bits, the attention to detail bits, because she's a great door opener. She's really brilliant at what she does. Harder to stay organized. So knowing you've got a lot to do, but not always getting it done to time, taking on things that, so you take on everything and then you become overwhelmed. Zoning out, so losing interest. So on something like a Zoom, you can watch it for 10 minutes, but then you've lost interest and you have to go off and walk. And that's the wonderful thing about Zoom, because at least you can turn the screen off, walk around and listen. So sometimes that's really good for somebody who's interacting. Is this sort of format can be really good. Picking to different ideas, as Ned was saying, feeling uneasy, knowing there's lots to do, but not being able to get started, that prevarication and that dis-ease. So I know what I've got to do, but I don't know where to start. And you feel overwhelmed, so you keep putting it off. It's like tidying the garage. I know I've got to do it, won't take me that long, but I just keep putting it off because it just seems like such a boring task. A lot of time and effort to look normal. This is girls camouflage quite often. So that thing of looking like other people and going out and emulating how other people are, echoing how other people are, to fit in is really exhausting. And then you get busy and you get exhausted. Chatty, interrupting, going on for too long, not knowing when to stop, interjecting ideas, buzz, I want to come and tell you, I'm so enthusiastic. Impulse buys, so want to buy it, love it, want to get it, so getting into debt as well. Forgetting to do something even though you know what to do, so ingredients in a meal, really busy, keen to make something, and then you forget something key, even though you knew it should have gone in, you forgot it, and then ruminating over it afterwards, that rumination which takes up your headspace. Why did I forget it? Why didn't I do it? Replaying it over and over again, which is exhausting. Finding it very hard to do nothing. I don't know, watching television, you can't watch a film and do nothing. So you'll see somebody playing on their phone while listening or doing something, sitting still and relaxing, really difficult. Regretting what you've not achieved when you know. And I think this is one that lots of adults talk to me about very much a lot of the time, is like, you know, why has my brother done but so much better than me and I'm just as capable? Why, when I've got this, and these qualifications and I can't get a job? And I think the point that Ned made, which was around disclosure in the workplace, is that hopefully with increasing awareness around neurodiversity and more training going into employers, that it will get better, that when you disclose, then you will get a better response. I think he's right at the moment. My son's got ADHD, DCD and dyslexia, and he's cautious about which he discloses because of people's responses. And actually, there was a report that was being published today looking at a hierarchy of responses when you disclosed, and that actually ADHD and Tourette's were lower down in terms of the employers not knowing how to respond or how to support somebody, much more likely and confident to support somebody with dyslexia. So we've got a long way to go, we really do. ADHD treatment, well, why not? I think it you know, in the right hands, given in the right way, can really make a difference for some children. So I think it's really important in children who receive a diagnosis. Girls are less likely than boys to be prescribed still, even when the children have the same levels of problems. So we need more training and awareness among our colleagues as well. And girls who have additional behavioral and emotional problems are more likely to receive medication. So it's like comes around the back door. You have to have the anxiety or you have to have other things going on before you get medication. We've got to change that, and we need more education going on. So girls can respond well to medication. That's really important. And untreated ADHD can lead to additional challenges. So I think gaining a diagnosis, gaining support, getting recognition of your strengths as well as your challenges, and getting appropriate support can really make a difference to your long-term and your short-term outcome. Now, this busy slide, and I apologize, I don't really, but it's really trying to connect, and I think there were a couple of questions around overlap between ADHD and dyspraxia or DCD, and I think that's really important. We keep thinking about people. And there isn't one classic person or classic girl with ADHD. Each girl, like each boy, will be different. And what we know, that neurodevelopmental conditions overlap often, and that's why there's all these little connecting lines going through. And we often see this happen. And there are some common traits which are really positive, like creativity, like persistence, like great imagination, energy, a problem solver. But comes with it some things like fatigue and rumination and planning and working memory challenges and that camouflaging. So just think about each, if you're an adult listening to this or you're a child or a parent of a child, is think about your child's overlapping picture of who they are and then look at what their strengths are and minimize their spiky profile really in a way. So there are some conditions that women may often have as well. We know this from the research, like substance misuse and anxiety. Anxiety is common in boys and girls, and sometimes we need to have help to manage that because the anxiety can be overwhelming and stops you actually being able to focus and attend to be able to get organized to help you with your ADHD and maximizing your creativity. Sleep is being associated with ADHD, often eating disorders, and as I said, like depression and bipolar disorder. So just think about individuals, and I think that's really important because I do see sometimes something I was reading this morning, which is like ADHD people do this and dyspraxic people do this and dyslexia people do that. But actually, if you look at this, and you see the evidence of overlap is really common with dyslexia and with dyspraxia or DCD, with dyscalculia, with autism spectrum disorder. Each person's going to have their own characteristic spiky profile of strengths and traits, and that's going to make a difference. So if you have ADHD and dyspraxia and you find riding a bike is really hard, then you might find learning to swim or doing martial arts much better. So it's tailoring it to your profile is going to be really helpful. So last couple of slides with some practical tips, and then I'm going to take some questions. I think it's really important to echo what Ned was saying generally about ADHD, but for girls as well, is really focus, start by your strengths and interests. This will be the route into thinking about things you want to do. It gives you the energy and the passion to do the things and to focus on them. And I think that's really important when you are a parent and you're trying to think about careers. Sometimes you just have to find, whether it's a hobby or interest or somebody you relate to, you're trying to find a way in to find the sort of career that's going to be right for you. And I think sometimes we do see that some people try several things before they find the right career for them. And often that's like little stepping stones to get to where you want to be. I think that if you've got ADHD traits, gaining a diagnosis can be helpful, and then getting that personalized support, right? Who are you? What do you need in terms of help and support to be able to channel those strengths very successfully? Get help if you've got those co-occurring, that spiky profile of challenges as well. So if you do have eating disorders, or you've got a substance misuse challenges as well, an addictive personality relating to alcohol or drugs, get some help for it, because that can help. And treating your ADHD, you don't have to wait, you can have help and support for both. Except I think you don't need to be perfect. Often the energy that a lot of women talk about is rumination, thinking about how do I improve? How do I be like everyone else? Sorry, I'm not sure what's buzzing here. And also, I really get fit. I think that exercise can really help, because you can focus and get some of that energy out in something that really helps you to then be able to focus. So it's really useful and can help with your sleep as well. So if you're a child or an adult, find something that works for you, that you can get rid of some of this fizz sometimes in your head and allows you to sleep as well. Because I think it really can you get difficulty with sleep, you're exhausted, you can't focus as well. That's secondary impact for you. Get help embedding good organization and time management skills. So if you're finding it really hard, you might need a coach, you might need scaffolding to set alarms, to set diary reminders. You don't need to remember it all yourself. I think that's really important. I think that's helpful for somebody else maybe to set up some of those things for you. Build in extra time as a buffer. Sometimes, this afternoon, Ken knows I've got another talk straight after this, and I should have built in a bigger buffer. I really should have time for recovery. So sometimes we bounce between one thing to another, and I often hear girls, particularly women, getting absolutely exhausted because they're trying to do too much. Work out in the day when you work best. Are you an early morning person? So you can get up and you can focus. So channel that energy into the bit that works best for you. Set alarms and reminders. I use alarms on my computer, on my phone as reminders, so you don't have to quite keep remembering everything. Use the technology effectively to take the cognitive load, so it allows you to do the things you want to do, that reminds you when you've got to pay the bills, so you don't have to remember to do those. And work out your reasons for procrastination. So if it is about doing the garage, could somebody else do it with you? Could you do it in a 10-minute slot and do it when you are most focused in the morning, rather than waiting for a Sunday afternoon when you can't be bothered? You don't know how long sometimes it's going to take, and that's why sometimes you can procrastinate. And sometimes if you reflect back and go, well, actually last time it only took me 10 minutes, so reason with yourself and work out why. I think that can really make a difference too. So I'm going to pause there, end the show, a second, what it says on my PowerPoint. And I'm going to stop my screen share, and I can take a few questions.
Okay, well, thanks for that very much, Amanda. Really appreciate it. Sorry, it's actually got sunny here today, and I can't see my screen now.
Not in Wales, I can tell you, it's grey.
No, it's a different problem. Just a question there from Charlotte, it's a sort of a common question. Do you know of any interaction between hormones and ADHD? I'm 26, diagnosed with combined ADHD 2 months ago after years of treatment for depression, anxiety, and panic disorder. I'm currently going through triation and talking to other women with ADHD, and it seems though there are connections between ADHD and hormones, i.e. the medication is less effective during the menstrual cycle, and ADHD symptoms seem to become worse.
So there's increasing interest at two ends of the cycle, which is in menstruation and around estrogen levels and the impact, but also at the time of menopause as well. So this is relatively more recent research, but we're starting to recognize, because remember that females being diagnosed is a relatively new thing, and following up people at different ages and stages. But I do hear that some people say that their ADHD is worse at particular times. It might be related to menstrual cycle. It could be also, we've got to make sure that we're not just putting everything on our menstrual cycle and everything on our ADHD. It could be an impact of other things in our life. But I do hear women talking about the impact of effect of their menstrual cycle, and also at the other end with menopause as well. But sometimes it's difficult to disentangle the two.
Indeed. So thanks very much for that. Can we go next to Anne, who has a question?
Yeah, Hi, thanks for
Hi.
that, Amanda. Breed has asked a question here. It's quite long, so I'm going to just skim over it, Breed. I hope you don't mind. But she says she agrees with your point that teachers and sometimes GPs need to be educated about all the presentations of ADHD. But she's wondering how you feel about the lack of diagnosis in children who may have a good academic ability, so where they're struggling more so with substantial executive function defects rather than actually with their schoolwork. So basically executive function skills that help you cope in life. She's wondering if you could comment on that, please.
I think that we're really missing a lot of girls and boys who have problems with planning, organization, time management, you know, all the executive function, emotional dysregulation. If you're not disruptive, you're less likely to be diagnosed, and that's a reality. And that goes back to training. It goes back to awareness of why. And I actually think if you look at, I haven't got it here, but I've got a nice little slide of a curve, is that if you think about, you get diagnosed if you're not meeting the expectation of the average kids in your class. If you're falling below the average kids in the class, then you get diagnosed or picked up, identified, because you're falling behind. If you're very bright, and you're falling behind relative to you, often you've moved into the average range. So then you're not picked up because you're not bad enough to get diagnosed, even though compared for you and your capability, you should be doing better. And I think we often see those young people being missed and sometimes only being diagnosed when they go to university, if they get to university, or later on as adults because of that. So I think that's a problem, is that if you're bright, you're not bad enough to get identified because the rest of your classmates, you're doing as well as a lot of them.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that. We just said, I'm not sure, I think Terry might have the next question.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Amanda. So
Hi.
from Elizabeth, she says, our teenage daughter, you mentioned about exercise, our teenage daughter has ADHD and she doesn't want to do any exercise. Any tricks or ideas, please?
Well, I think the first thing is don't make it a big thing, make it a very small thing and start off with, 5 minutes of exercise. I think Ned's idea of dogs is I applaud that. I have 2 dogs when my son was growing up and got him out, got him for a walk when he didn't want to do any exercise. So the first thing, have a dog, go for a walk. Also, I think modeling what you're doing. So if you don't do any exercise, they're less likely to do exercise as well. If you can do something as a family that is enjoyable together. I know it's harder at the moment, but even just going for a walk around the block is better than not going for a walk around the block. Even doing 5 minutes and finding something that you like. So if your daughter likes some music, particularly, then get the music on. And even if you did 5 minutes in the kitchen, doing dancing to ABBA is better than no minutes. So sometimes I think we want to do too much and it's got to be a big thing. And actually starting off, if you haven't done exercise, you have to just start to see yourself as someone who does exercise, not having to do it. It's part of who you are. And that sometimes takes a while to do.
Okay, well thanks very much for that. We'll probably just have time for maybe 1 or maybe 1.5 questions before you head off to your next presentation and to give you a break. I think it's a big question and it comes from Jetty. Do you think girls are expected to live up to the same standard of society and hide their ADHD symptoms more than boys?
Yeah, I do. And I think we see this not only in ADHD, but in ADHD and autism overlap in some cases. But, I think we see girls are camouflage, mask, to model their behavior on the constraints of being like the other girls, being part of a pack is more important in some ways. I think it then shows itself. It's very effortful. A girl was telling me the other day, when an adult, a woman with ADHD, I was talking to the other day, and she was saying, she can go out and she can do the talk. So she's in business and she stands there and she can do all the echoing and the, fine. And I'm listening, and she's going through all the list of things she needs to do to try and stay focused and lean forward to show that she's interested. But she says it's exhausting. So when she comes home, the effort of doing that has an impact. And I think that's that bit of not being able to be yourself and having to be like others is really effortful. And I think that's about accepting and understanding that the ADHD comes with lots of positive things. And if we can harness those, much better to allow ourselves to feel comfortable in being the skin we're in, rather than trying to put on somebody else's costume.
Okay. Well, I want to say thank you very much for that. And as I was saying to you yesterday, you know, I'm in the job about 3.5 years now. And I've heard your name an awful lot over those last 3.5 years. So I was really looking forward to seeing your presentation today. So I want to thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you.
And there you go, 3:30. So you have a whole 5 minutes between now and your next presentation.
Time for a cup of tea.
Yay!
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And I hope the rest of the day is good for you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.